This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Isotope, Native Instruments, Atom Audio, and SAE Institute. You're hearing my voice right now mixed through Isotope, Ozone, and Velvet on Atom Audio monitors and headphones. Make sure to get my free mixing course at mixmasterbundle.com, and please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. And please like and subscribe to this YouTube channel because it's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
Yeah, there's more of that, and also AI mastering and mastering online. When the last edition came out, Lander was around, but it was new. And honestly, most pros didn't like it. But now, last time I talked to them, they had 3 million, maybe 4 million songs that they've learned from. And it's a lot better now. But there's a real secret using either mastering plugins or using an online service, and that's always use a reference track. And if you use the reference track, you'll be a lot happier than if you just let the AI take over. Because that'll give you something good, but the reference track will give you something that you want.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Dreaming of a career in audio or the entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs where you'll learn on professional-grade gear with industry pros, learning through real projects, not just lectures. Explore studio production, live sound, audio for film, and a whole lot more. Or take the entertainment business program to learn about contracts, promotion, and more. With diploma, associate, and bachelor's programs, there's a path for you. Book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-5848. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is producer and engineer Bobby Owsinski, one of the best-selling authors in the music industry, with 24 books that have become staples in audio recording, music, and music business programs worldwide. His titles include The Mixing Engineer's Handbook, The Music Business Advice Book, and The Musician's AI Handbook. A contributor to Forbes as a category expert on the new music business, Bobby's industry blogs have won numerous awards, and he's appeared on CNN and ABC News as a music branding and audio expert. His highly rated Inner Circle podcast is now in its 10th year with over 500 episodes featuring top guests from around the music industry. Bobby Owsinski has also been featured in RSR10. Wow, this is one of my earliest episodes. 395 and 458, which is pretty recently, actually. So please welcome back Bobby to Recording Studio Rockstars. Bobby, my friend, are you ready to rock yet again?
Thanks for having me, Lidge. Yeah, I didn't realize there were that many that I was on before.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I like having some of my favorite repeat guests back on the show, and it's always been fun to do episodes with you, so it's nice to have you back.
Thank you for asking.
You're always so prolific, man. You're doing so much stuff. It's like you're probably one of the most prolific people I know in in this sort of teaching space, online or in print.
Yeah, you know what's funny is yesterday my internet went out, and there was no way that I could do that because you can't do a lot of that stuff on a phone.
Right.
And I just felt so weird. It was a good thing the Super Bowl was on, or else I wouldn't know what to do with myself.
Did you watch the Super Bowl? Did you see the halftime show and all that?
Yeah, I'm an Eagles fan, so it went well.
Yeah, it went pretty damn well for you, I would say.
Yeah.
I wasn't a fan one way or the other, but I watched it and I was like, wow, this would be a miracle if these guys came back.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. Well, let's see. We have talked multiple times. You've had me as a guest on your show too, generously, to talk about the whole home studio issue here in Nashville. And I think last time we did an interview, the AI handbook was out. And so that was really cool to talk about. But recently, I think you've had some new editions come out, right? You've got the Mastering Engineer's Handbook, 5th edition. Is that sort of a recent update for you?
Yeah, I think that was November it came out. Yeah.
So when did you publish the first edition of that?
I'd say probably around 2005. The first one was the Mixing Engineer's Handbook in 1999. Recording came in 2002. Mastering might have been 2004. So, there hasn't been a new edition since 2017, so it was really due an update because things have changed considerably since then.
Yeah. What do you want to talk about? Some of the would you like to describe what's in the book? What people might expect if they were to go check it out?
Well, the whole idea is that there are so many tools for mastering now, and there's so many services that it's easier than ever to do it yourself. However, these tools are extremely powerful, so you have to be careful and you have to know what you're doing, or else you won't get the results that you require. So this handbook actually goes through the history of mastering and why it came to be known as mastering, why it became creative, so a creative process. So there's all that background, but there's also the background of how do you do this yourself? If you're going to use a real mastering engineer, a human mastering engineer, how do you do that? If you're going to use online services, well, how do you do that? It also takes a deep dive into vinyl and a deep dive into streaming, creating for streaming, and a deep dive into CDs because some people still use them. So there's all of that. Talk about LUFS levels as well, which is a big confusing topic for everybody. And there's a bunch of new interviews as well. So that's kind of the cool thing. I always enjoy interviewing people for the books. Anybody
notable that you want to mention with the interviews? You probably interviewed all kinds of people you've interviewed so many people over
all the legends. Yeah. Doug Sachs, Bob Ludwig, Bernie Grumman.
Yeah. I got a chance to work with him years ago too, actually.
Yeah. He's a great guy to work with. And he was one of the best interviews ever because he was so cerebral about it. He really came from a thoughtful place rather than most of the time, and it's like this for mixing engineers too. It's okay. I know what it's supposed to sound like. Let me make it happen.
Yeah.
But Bernie came from a place of how does it make you feel? What can I do to make it feel better to you and to talk to you? So that was fun because, again, he was so cerebral and that just doesn't happen much. Or if it does, people can't explain it. That's probably the other part of it. I guess we all have that in us, but getting a chance to being able to identify it and then describe it is kind of tough sometimes.
Yeah, I'd say so. Can you think of any of the strangest ways that people have described music to you?
Well, it's the whole color thing. Make it sound gray, make it sound red, more red, things like that, which you can sort of interpret, but not always. People have all sorts of different terms of what they think the music feels. Well, it's not that they think. The music does feel like that in a certain way, and it does trigger an emotion, and that's different for everybody. So the way someone might describe it, you might not necessarily get all the time. But, that being said, it's completely valid no matter what it is. If somebody says, gee, I need it more yellow, it's like, well, okay, what does yellow mean to you? And let's figure it out.
Yeah, I once had a client who told me, I was mixing and he was standing over my shoulder and he said, imagine you're walking down a path and out of the corner of your eye, you see like a fairy on the limb of a tree, and then you turn to look at it, but it's gone, and all you see is a little pixie dust trail left behind. Make it sound like that. And I was like, yeah, all right, cool, I can do that. I mean, I don't know about the turning and looking part, but I could throw a little pixie dust in there.
Okay, so that's pretty bizarre.
It's pretty bizarre. He was a bizarre character. He was making cool music too.
I mean, that's part of the music business. Huh? It's funny because what I've found is the most prolific, most talented people, and I think this is like this in the arts in general, are some of the most tortured people inside. And this is their way of coping. But we don't always get that. We just get the top level of it. Well, this is your music, but really when you go beneath, there's more going on. And if you can unlock that, that's when you really have the synergy to make it happen where everybody's happy. That's not always easy.
Yeah. Now you've had, let me, before I pivot to new questions, with the Mastering Engineer's Handbook, what are some new, I mean, perhaps you already answered this, but what are some newer elements? What are some brand new things in mastering? I mean, there's all these wild plugins now that sort of help you DIY master and stuff like that too.
Yeah, there's more of that, and also touches on AI mastering and mastering online. When the last edition came out, Lander was around, but it was new. And honestly, most pros didn't like it. But now, last time I talked to them, they had 3 million, maybe 4 million songs that, they've learned from. And it's a lot better now. But there's a real secret to using either mastering plugins or using an online service. And that's always use a reference track. And if you use the reference track, you'll be a lot happier than if you just let the AI take over. Because that'll give you something good, but the reference track will give you something that you want.
So in the AI space, you would select a reference track and submit it as the one that it should reference, even for an online service?
Yeah. So what happens is it copies the EQ and copies the compression, and it just maps it and then it puts it onto yours. So it never really intakes the song itself. You don't have to worry about copyright or anything like that. You're just taking the picture of the process and then putting it on you. So on yours. So what you have to do then is really get a good one that you like. And that's usually something that's already been mastered, preferably a hit. And, if you think it sounds good, then that's the sound you'll get. But you have to be careful. The real problem there is people will try to go beyond and say, well, it sounds good, but let me tweak it a little bit. No, just stop. Don't.
Oh, they'll download the master from online and then try and make some more adjustments to it?
A lot of times, yeah. I think that's the downfall of self-mastering, is when you try to get a little bit better. But you never do that when a pro masters your stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's your final iteration.
Yeah.
One of the challenges, I think, with the reference idea in this AI-assisted tools, mastering, I find even, Isotope is incredible. Ozone, I love these features. Being able to have it suggest, a mastering assistant in Ozone, it's great because it inspires me. I tend to jump in and make adjustments, and maybe that is a situation where that makes more sense. But it's still very cool that it does it. But the challenge again is that idea of like finding the reference track, because it's like, no two songs really necessarily sound alike unless you're trying to go for a specific sonic. And when you're doing your own original music, I wonder if it's challenging for people to figure out, well, what's my reference track? Well, does that really sound like my music or my record? Did you have to cross that bridge when you were trying to figure this out and write about it?
Yeah, see, I wouldn't go that direction. And let's just talk about reference tracks in general. The best way you can use them is find something that you really like in a track. I really like the sound of the reverb. I really like the kick drum in this one. I really like the way the snare sounds, something like that. So you may have multiple reference tracks that you're using for one specific thing. I really like the balance in this one. So that's what makes a great reference track, where you're going, oh, this is good. I'd really like to get close to that.
Yeah.
The other way with the reference track is something that you know, that you've lived with forever and you know what it's supposed to sound like. And that's better in terms of when you're auditioning speakers or something like that. And then that's
Right.
really valuable. But when it comes to something for your song, yeah, you can't get it exactly like that. But, there's something that you probably like and you go, I wish I could make it sound sort of like this. And that's usually a good choice. You can always use another one if it doesn't work.
That's true. That's true. And then I guess one question for me would be like, how often do you think people are uploading a Beatles track as to have that be the reference? Something with the odd panning and everything. Would that still work in a situation like that?
Probably, but I haven't heard of anybody going back that far, to be honest with you. There's one person recently that I ran into said, I try to make everything sound like the Beatles, although when I listened to his stuff, it was nowhere like it. But, in his mind, that's what he was going for. One of the problems, you mentioned about the panning, what most people don't realize back in those old records where you had the music on the left side and the vocals on the right side, well, they didn't have pan pots back then. All they had was left and right at first for one of the stereo tracks, and then left, center, right. So that's why the panning was so bizarre. They just didn't have the option.
Yeah, and as you pointed out, it's referencing the equalization and the dynamics and probably things like, let's see, EQ, dynamic, maybe it's picking up on some transient information as well. So that may not care so much about, whether it's what's in the left and what's in the right. But width too, it's picking up on width and stuff like that. And I guess harmonic content.
I don't know. That's a good question. If the harmonic content, it never seems to, as far as I can tell, it never seems to capture that.
Yeah.
But it may be, and I'm just not aware, and it's being introduced subtly, but that's something we're checking out and find out.
So I actually misspoke earlier. I didn't work with Bernie Grumman. We were at his studio. I just remember we were working with Brian Big Bass Gardner.
Big Bass, yeah, right, yeah.
Which was a lot of fun. It was such a cool experience. I remember that studio feeling like you were walking into, the history of music.
Well, I'll take you back even further. When I came to LA, I did a lot of work at A&M Records, which is now Henson. And Studio C, what became Studio C, was Bernie's room. And it was his mastering room. He was actually in that facility. And it was the weirdest room. It was small and long, and it wasn't very wide. And yet some of his classic records come out of that, and nobody else could make it work. Any other mastering engineer that went in just could not make it work the same way that Bernie did. And when he finally moved out to his own studio, there were some people saying, it sounded better when you were in the other one. Everybody always says something like that, Right. But when he started under really questionable conditions. So, but what ended up happening was the A&M techs went with them and built a lot of the gear that he wound up using. All, the equalizers, modifying the speaker crossovers, things like that. That was all custom, and that came from the A&M engineers. It came with the tech engineers.
It's such a fascinating thing to witness in mastering studios. So, for example, Sterling Sound right here in East Nashville, same thing, in-house tech. There's a tech shop, and it's very common to have somebody who's building the gear for the studio. In a multi-track, in a recording studio, Sunset Sound was one of the first places I saw that, and Electrical Audio in Chicago. Just places that would build what they needed, which is always been fascinating to me. And I love the idea of actually creating a recording studio that way, which I think was the early ways, of doing it was you sort of built what you needed. You built the special talkback switch, you built the headphone systems and all that. Have you had any experience? I mean, you must have interacted with that kind of studio in your time too.
Well, yeah, I remember I came out to LA go back to even before then on the East Coast, going to some of the big studios, in Philadelphia, Sigma Sound and things like that. And, there was no such thing as headphone cue systems. Everybody built their own. Westlake was notorious for having the best cue system. And after a while, they began to manufacture and sell them. But it was because they were really loud. And where everybody else is using these 50-watt, Crown amplifiers, they were using a 400-watt one, and that had a lot to do with it.
From synths to strings to studio guitars, Complete 15 has it all. Native Instruments' flagship bundle gives you everything you need to create pro music in any genre, with cutting-edge instruments like Contact 8, Massive X, battery, guitar rig, and session guitarist for lifelike electric and acoustic guitar parts. Use our code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com or get started with Complete Start totally free. I remember coming to Nashville and going into studios and seeing these, the remnants of the previous system where it was an amplifier and they're feeding passive headphone boxes. And the headphone of choice was the Tascam T20. I think that's what it was.
Oh, the Fostex T20.
Oh, Fostex, excuse me. Fostex T20. And, you'd put them on and you'd be like, really? This is what everybody wants? And the musicians would say, yeah, because they're not bright. They don't blow your ears up while you're working. They're just like dark and kind of warm sounding, I guess. And maybe they were comfortable on the head or had lots of power. I don't know.
Yeah. I have a pair right here, actually, from way back when. And they were comfy, I have to say that. And they sounded reasonable. And they weren't terribly expensive. So we all know how headphones get really beat up badly. So you're always looking for something that is an inexpensive replacement. And that was kind of in the neighborhood.
Yeah. Another aspect of headphone systems in studios like that, hard working studios, is you learned you needed to be able to do maintenance on them yourself. You don't just throw them out and get a new pair of headphones. You get out the screwdriver, you disassemble them, and you put, solder in a new driver on the left side because, somebody, the drummer maybe, blew up the left-hand side of the headphone on the last session. Or wires would go out. So I had some experience like rewiring headphones and stuff. I'd be curious. I bet there's not a lot of that going on in the home studio world these days.
I think you're right. That was no fun. And I have a big tech background, which I don't utilize anymore. So I did all that stuff, all the wiring you can think of in a studio. And that was kind of my least favorite. That was your least favorite? Yeah, until DB25s came around. That became my least favorite of, soldering those up.
Did you do things like looming patch bays and all that kind of stuff?
Oh, God, yes. That was another horrible experience, usually. and it was because, you'd have 48 points or later 96 points, and you'd lose track where everything was. And, because you're looking at it from the back. So
did you have to deal with those? They used to have tape labeling that had numbers printed on them. So you'd have to pull out some number and it would say like my old MCI console had that, and it would say 286, and you'd put a piece of tape on that said 286, and then it'd go on the other end of the wire somewhere. And that's how you could hopefully find, trace a signal flow in a console. Yeah. Just crazy,
We're so
a lot
much
easier
better
when
off.
the wires are colored.
Yeah. Well, we're so much better off now.
Yeah.
With voice over IP.
I don't remember if I told you this, but I sold my MCI console. It's no longer in the studio. And that was when I did my upgrade with Carl Tatz, which is wonderful. I love the sound of the room now. And then just recently, this past year, and we actually were able to show it off at NAMM, is I teamed up with Make Believe Studios and Metric Halo, and we created the MBSI plugin, which is a model of that. Most importantly, we teamed up with Bill Simzik. And so we did a signature plugin of the MCI console that's got the EQ and it's got the gain and the overdrive, and we added some compression algorithms too. So now it has a compressor in there where the gate signal used to be.
Was it a 416 or 428? Was
No,
it 4
it
series?
was before all that.
Oh.
It was custom. He started it in a garage. I think he was commissioned to build it and started it in a garage in '69.
With the airplane?
Yep.
Yeah. I saw that one in Criteria. They used to have one in the big studio.
That was it, Studio C.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so another thing that came to mind, I was trying to think what you brought up. You brought up something that just made me think of the songwriting process. And I know you've had a lot of experience in that world. You've also, been prolific in writing books and talking about this on your blog and podcast. But just the process of the creative side of all this. I don't even have a question in mind now. I just love talking about songwriting. So yeah. I guess, anything that you've seen coming up new, maybe it's the AI question. Maybe that's worth asking. But places where you're seeing new technology and new opportunities appear in the creative songwriting space that allows people to be more prolific or just sort of take down some barriers to writing songs and getting busy with their creations?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. The first one would be there's an AI, it's not a plugin, it's an app. It's called Scalar 2. And what that's good, and it'll do a lot of things, but what I found that best for was it will come up with some chord changes that you never thought of, especially on turnarounds, where you go, oh, that's brilliant. Geez, I never would have thought of that in a million years. So that's a time when AI can really be helpful.
So you could take your existing chord arrangement and it'll throw in ways to turn around to go from one place to another part to another?
Well, again, other than that, you can just say, give me some substitutions.
Right.
And it will do that. And again, most of the time it comes up with something you go, wow, I never would have thought of that. So
that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I found that to be really helpful. On the lyrics side, any of the large language models can be good if you're not very good at writing lyrics. I mean, we can denigrate AI all you want, but usually what it comes up with is better than like Moon, June type of rhymes.
Right.
No, going back to Scalar, sorry. One of the things that I like about it, if I never hear another 1-4-5 chord change, I'll be really happy because it's so overdone. And we're not even talking about blues, which I get that, it's built around that. We're just talking about normal pop songs that 1-4-5, you know where they're going all the time. So I have hope for songwriter when there's something that will give us some different places to go. But that's just me.
Like when you heard Louie Louie, you're like, we're good. We got it covered.
Yeah, right. Although that was a one minor. That was in D minor, I think.
Was it one minor or was it a 5 minor? I can't remember. Everybody's thinking. We're all quietly thinking together. Yeah, one minor. Awesome. So I went and saw a great cover band here recently, and they were doing a Steely Dan tribute. And I'll be honest, I sort of went thinking like, oh, okay, all right, I'm going to go see Steely Dan, But when I saw it, watching them play, so they performed their asses off. They were so good, and extremely tight as a band. But what really struck me was exactly what you just talked about, was watching the way, Steely Dan had put songs together with these really clever chord progressions and substitutions and, like moving incrementally from one place to another chordally in the song, where the melody can really follow, or maybe the chord follows the melody. Maybe you start with where you think you want the melody to go to get up to the next note, and then you just find the chords that work with it. Has that been something interesting to you, or does that sort of bring any thoughts to mind about that process?
Well, I like that, but again, you have to think of their background, be reminded of their background, which was very jazz-oriented.
Right.
So they had the education in that and what to do. If you don't have that education, you can't put it into effect because you just don't know what those substitutions might be.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So Chord Scaler or Scaler 2, is that an app for the phone or something like that?
No, it's an app for your desktop and computer, and it'll do a lot more than what I just said, but that was what really struck me as, oh, this is really useful. It will go in and it will it'll become your co-composer if you wanted to. I think that's going a little far myself, but you use whatever tools that you need as you need them.
That's an interesting idea. I mean, co-writing is something that I think is good for us to practice, and it can be hard to find somebody who wants to co-write with you sometimes. And, it's a big deal in Nashville. So pretty cool that people could at least try that,
There's a big copyright issue with that. That's the only problem.
Yeah.
Because
I think it was you who educated us on our previous interview that one of the nice things about AI is that if you go in and you prompt it, then you're protected by the copyright for that song creation you come up with.
Yeah, actually there was a copyright ruling that just came out in January by the Copyright Board. It was their first real big one. They were making rulings as it went along, but this was like a guideline that they brought out. And they just hammered home a bunch of things. One is if something is 100% AI written, AI generated, it cannot be copyrighted because only a human can copyright something.
Right.
But you can take something that was AI generated and a human could manipulate it, and that could be copywritten. One of the gray points is they don't say how much. So, for instance, if you're using whatever AI as a copyright as a co-writer, they say it's only on a case-by-case basis that they can make a ruling whether it can be copywritten or not. So you always have to think in the back of your mind, okay, can I really make this work, or is this kind of futile? I'll just come up with something that everybody can copy anyway.
It's fascinating. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, well, I think the real problem that we have here is that our Western ears only like so many chord changes, only like so many melodies, and there's only 12 notes that we have. So there's not many ways to go. And one could say that everything already has been written in a way, and, it should be harder and harder to copyright things, although it's not.
Yeah. Speaking of which, well, I'll add this comment. It's funny. It makes me think of how what you just described, where AI could generate it, but then it's only copyrightable once you change it, is almost like flipping the whole sample issue conundrum on its head. So, if you go way back to Paul's Boutique, the Beastie Boys, these times when somebody's taking a copyrighted recording and song and sampling it and then creating something new with it, then it became a challenge. Like, well, maybe you can't quite own the, can you or can't you own the rights to it? So I know it's not quite the same thing, but it made me think of that. And it's interesting to think that now it's like, just that if you put your human thumb stamp on it, now it's a creation that you can have some rights to, which is cool. And now I forgot what I was going to go with that. Probably more songwriting stuff.
Well, I used to work with a very famous electronic musician whose name shall remain nameless. And the reason why is his real secret sauce was he would take famous samples and he would manipulate them in such a way where you couldn't tell what the sample was. So he'd speed it up, slow it down, distort it, take it inside out, whatever. And then he got a little scared about it. So then he went and he got the most obscure Brazilian music he can think of. And he used that, but it did the same thing. And as far as I know, no one has ever brought anything up to him. So I guess it worked.
At Isotope, mixing and mastering just got even smarter. Velvet gives you silky vocals with sibilance, learn, de-essing, dynamic tone shaping, and de-click, all in one plugin. And Ozone 11 now includes clarity, upward compression, and AI-powered stem focus to help you master like a pro. Use code ROCK10 for 10% off Ozone or any of Isotope's incredible plugins at isotope.com. It's funny. There are so many resources out there now that are in public domain too. So I forgot what it is. Is it archives.org or something? When you go to that website, it's part of the Library of Congress, I think, and they have all these public domain recordings where both, I guess, where basically, essentially, you can just go use the samples however you want. You can download them. Of course, they all sound, quite dated, but a very cool sound. And they've also done this incredible thing where there is a graphic display of all the sounds. It's like a big sort of heat map, sonic heat map. And as you scroll your mouse over, you hear these little bits and samples, and you just kind of hear the tonality and, as you're flipping from dot to dot. And each one of them represents a little sample. And then you find something, you're like, oh, that's cool. It sounds like a, mid-rangey fiddle part. And you click on it, and there's like an old 78 recording or something, and you can pop that open and download it. And so I was playing around in Ableton Live last year where I would take those and import them into the, the granular synthesizer. I forgot what the name of it is, but the granular synth. And it was just really fun to try and create new compositions and instruments out of that stuff. Cool resource just for creating,
Yeah. I have to check that out. I haven't seen that.
Yeah, I'll try and see if I can remember to post the link in there. I just thought of it. And then, let's see, what else have you seen in the songwriting space? What about just communities or places like, is it easier now to sort of connect with people and collaborate?
Yeah, I think one of the big things, especially on a publisher and record label level, is the songwriting camps that they have.
Yeah.
And I get it. I understand why they're doing it. I don't know how effective they are.
Well,
what have you heard?
Well, I actually joined NSAI last year, which is the Nashville Songwriters Association.
Yeah.
And I'd been going, they do sort of like every Tuesday, they have sort of some sort of meeting. So you gather there. And, it's been a great experience for me. There are times when you go and you're really inspired. There are times where you feel like you stepped into some, weird, B movie about a community college or something. And there's you hear stuff where you think wow, that's never gonna leave the bedroom. This is probably the furthest it's ever come, that song. And then you hear stuff that's really inspiring. So that was cool for me to experience. I also had the experience where maybe I want to make, I'd be more excited about making art rock in my studio than making a song that will have a life on Music Row, doing a circuit of publishing companies, yet that's sort of where their focus is. But despite all that, which I've also found almost every time I've stepped out and just gone and joined something and gone out there to participate, is I always come back feeling like there were many unexpected positive takeaways just from getting out there and doing something, and I end up learning all kinds of interesting stuff from people. And I've been thrown in a room with co-writers where you got 30 minutes or 45 minutes to come out with a song. And boy, is that hard to do. Strangers,
Right.
But we always come out with something.
It's funny because I've interviewed a lot of professional songwriters on my podcast who have multiple hits and big hits as well. And because they're professional, they do this. That's what they do. And I'm always amazed at how they adapt. And they'll say, well, I was just writing with so-and-so. And I'm thinking, how is that a fit? And then they'll describe what they're doing and saying, well, this is mostly loop-based, and I don't do that, but boy, I had fun. Things like that you wouldn't expect. Professional songwriters are very adaptable. They're really good at what they do and how they do it. That being said, almost every single one of them has said that if they feel within the first 10 or 15 minutes that it's going to be unproductive, they're out of there.
Really? No reason to stay.
Yeah. If it's going to be unproductive, if they don't like the other person, or if they feel like they're being abused or something like that, they leave right away.
Do they offer any, little secret tips for how to, I got an emergency phone call. Is it one of those?
I didn't ask, to be honest with you, but I get the feeling that it's not that at all. They're probably diplomatic because they're diplomatic people, but again, it's one of those things where if you've done it enough and you've had some hit, there's one example. There's a woman who has a huge number of credits for both film and television and some, big song hits as well. And she was saying that when she gets into it, and this is someone that's written with some spectacular heavyweights, and she was saying that right away she can feel it, and she'll leave, and I don't get the feeling that she's diplomatic at all about it. It's like, not going to work. Yeah, no, let's go. And a lot of it has to do with younger songwriters for the most part. The one example she gave me is she went to write on, label said, hey, you should write with this person. And it was someone that either didn't have a hit, was just signed, or had a minor hit. And she said that the person never looked at me, never took any of my input, didn't even care if I was there or not. So I get up and I left. And I don't even know if they realized that I left.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and I think with those co-writers that I've listened to, they're doing so much. I mean, they're doing writing in the morning, writing in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And
that's
you got to be fast
yeah.
and furious, get it in and out quickly.
One of the things I always felt, though, about professional songwriters, it becomes, I don't want to say like a job or rote, but they know all of the tricks, and you get the feeling that something is homogenized in a way,
right,
rather than organic. And I'm sure that, I'm not being kind when I say that, but I have heard, the output from some of these, and it's like, yeah, that seems pretty standard what you came up with, but it's a song,
I wonder if a great combination can be an artist who's doing the organic process, and there's a lot more like, kicking around on a sunny day in a grassy field, coming up with the ideas. And then that gets brought into the co-writing session, and then the pro comes in and can quickly, get right down to business. It's like, I don't know why I thought of this. This is a terrible analogy, but I thought of going to the dentist for some reason. It's like, you spend all the fun time, like eating chocolate, and then you show up at the dentist, and the last thing you want your dentist to do is like, look for an organic, long process for figuring out how to put your fillings in. You just want them to get right down to work and show you what the right answers are. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, and then what about you, Bobby? Do you have much experience songwriting yourself? Has that been part of your process too?
It was for quite a while, kind of mid-career, I would say. I was somewhat successful. I had some songs like on a #1 TV show and things, which is nice.
Instrumental or vocal too?
No, with the vocal. And, that was, although honestly, when they played, they went by pretty fast.
And were you doing the singing? Are you a singer as well?
No. It was someone else that did it. As a matter of fact, I think we wrote it for somebody, now that I think about it. There was a bunch of them, but I was not the singer in that case.
I've seen that here in Nashville too, especially at NSAIs, people who come in and they just write a song and then they bring in people to do it. And of course, when they do that and they do it well, you hear the version of it. You're like, that sounds great,
Yeah.
because it's a great band and it's a great singer and everything. And it's fascinating to me how there are people that are really motivated to do that. And then there are, of course, people who really just want to, experience the act of singing themselves and all that.
One of the things I noticed about professional songwriters that, write 1,000 songs a year, or hundreds anyway, or those that write for TV and they write, hundreds of cues, they're excellent producers because they do it so much. They do it more than the top pros, because the top pros, working on 10 songs or 12 songs at a time, and they work them to death. But these people are cranking them out very, very quickly, and they get really good at making things sound good. Yeah. And I've always admired that. And a lot of them will say that, they basically used my arrangement and my production, on a hit song.
I've heard that many times in Nashville. I've heard Nashville had, in the musician and band world, there was, session musicians. There was a process of doing the demo and then doing the master, and the demo goes to the master. And, there would be the guitar player would say, like, I wrote that line on the demo, but then the A-list session player comes in and replays that line on the master, and there it is on the record, But I don't know that there was I don't remember hearing that there was a process for the, the demo melody writer to see a result on the end of the final or not. But I also heard a lot of people talking about how, like, I heard people say, like, I like the demos so much better than the record they did.
Yeah. I can remember, I knew Gino and Joe Vanelli fairly well when they're on top. And I can remember hearing some of the demos for an album, and I'm thinking how fantastic they were, especially the band. And then hearing the album, kind of being disappointed. It's like, wow, the band was really exciting, and this is kind of like pop production,
Right. So speaking of which, you were talking about chord substitutions. I don't remember if you brought up the word bridge, but I feel like I've heard that recently, this idea of the disappearance of the bridge in music. And maybe it was Rick Beato or somebody who suggested it, and I picked up on it. Maybe it was you. I mean, it's hard, It
might have been me.
I'm listening. But I mean, I do see that. I see young musicians or even new songwriters come with an idea. Maybe they're performing it, maybe it's done, or maybe they're just, riffing on a new idea, and it'll be like one thing, maybe it's one chord progression just over and over again. And I wonder what your thoughts are, or what you feel like you're seeing in music relative to that.
I think bridges are coming back. That's the good part. But there's a reason that we lost them for a while, and that's everything was loop-based. Now, when I say everything, I'm talking more about pop and top 40, Spotify top 40, things like that, where if you write to a loop, it's really hard to have a bridge. So they would substitute it, and what you'd have is a breakdown instead, and the breakdown would act as a bridge, or you would find something. It would be the same chord structure, only the vocal would be wildly different, or there'd be a rap, something like that, and that would act as a bridge. But that's because, you were kind of hemmed in because you're writing around this loop. But I've had, again, pro songwriters tell me that they'd go and they'd co-write with some of the younger musicians, some of the younger songwriters, and one said specifically that he thought they had the song finished, and the person he was writing, who's quite a bit younger, turned to him and said, "Well, what about the bridge?" And he went, "Really? You want a bridge? Oh, yeah, let's do it." And he was all, enthused because finally he gets a chance to do, song structure that we've grown up on. The other thing that's kind of missing, there are three things really, if you think about it, that are missing. One is you don't hear solos anymore.
Well, I'm working with an artist who insists on keeping the prog rock in there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you guys will hear it,
Yeah.
That's one of the things. Like, we can hear what we're hearing, but, when everybody hears it, it usually means it's a big hit, right?
Yeah. You also don't hear fade-ins and fade-outs or big intros, long intros anymore. And the reason for that, there's a historical context there. Back in the heyday of radio, disc jockeys used to talk over the song. They'd talk over the intro. They'd talk over the fade. And that was a big deal. And if you wanted your record played, then you would have some of that so the DJ can speak over it. So that was built in. And we got used to it. If you didn't realize why it was there, you just thought, well, that's the way song structure is, hit song structure. But no, it was there for a reason. And then since radio is not that prominent anymore, we got away from those, and also got away from any kind of intro. In many cases, they'll start right in on the hook and chorus sometimes.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I was working on a song with a mixer recently, and we were discussing whether the song should just come right in with the vocal on the first verse, and or use the sort of backwards guitar and 4-bar phrase we had put at the top. I voted for keeping the intro in because I liked the idea we had. But it's interesting to think about those versions, and then I think about like the start of a song often when I'm producing it or arranging it with the band or something. That's like, do you just want to press? Well, first of all, is there such a thing as pressing play?
Yeah.
Second of all,
yeah, right.
Second of all, if you press play and it starts, does it just jump right into the groove, or do you need to do you need something, dun 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 dun, and then the groove happens, or do you need some sound that just sort of puts your head in a space and then the song begins? It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, we're getting back to more traditional song structure. I think that's a good thing. Not so much intros and outros, but certainly everything else, with bridges, the occasional solo now, but not often, but there was a dearth of them for the longest time. 5 years, 7 years.
Are you ready to launch your career in the audio or entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, right here in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs to prepare you for the industry. From studio production and live sound to audio for film and a whole lot more. You'll learn by doing, working with professional-grade gear alongside experienced industry pros. If you're more into the business side of entertainment, SAE's Entertainment Business Program teaches essential basics like contracts and promotion to help you navigate the industry. With diploma, associate, or bachelor's degrees, there's a path for everyone. Plus, Career Services supports graduates as they take the next step. Want to see it for yourself? Immerse yourself in Nashville's exciting music scene and book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-5848. Howdy, Rockstars. We're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Bobby Owsinski, back joining us at Recording Studio Rockstars. Excited to have him here. Bobby, you ready to jam?
Let's do it.
All right. So let's see what else. I'm looking at your books here, and maybe I'll do a quick screen share at the risk of being clunky with pressing buttons and all that. I'll see if I can share the screen. So, Rockstars, if you haven't checked out Bobby's books, when I say he's prolific, I'm not kidding. This is just a list of some of these incredible books that he's written in all variety around it. Look at that. Abbey Road to Ziggy Stardust. That's great. Oh, it's Ken Scott's autobiography.
Yeah.
That's really cool, man. I didn't know you'd done that.
Yeah.
And
I've done some that aren't in the music industry. Saw the one on cruising there, but a couple on business, social media for business. Things like
that. And this one right here, Music 4.1, is one of the first ones that I was introduced to. Let me see if I can get that big on the screen. And I was really, I had gotten a copy of it, and then we talked about it. And I think you had just published the 4.1 edition, or maybe it was the 4.0. But reading it, I was like really knocked out, man. There was this deep level of very intelligent, observations on the music business, what it means to create and get your music out there, and, clever ways to promote yourself and all that kind of stuff. And I just thought that was really cool, man. You've always been so good at covering all these different aspects of the music part. I noticed I don't think you've done a book specifically on songwriting. Is that right?
I haven't. I never felt qualified as compared to a lot of the people I know. I just feel like they're a lot more qualified than I am.
But you do have some other ones, like the Mixing Engineer's Handbook. Is there anything you want to say between that and the Recording Engineer's Handbook? Both of these look like something we should be reading. What would we find in these books if we were to go get them?
Mixing Engineer's Handbook was my first book in 1999. And I was told there were no books on mixing at that point. And I was told by many people that you can't write a book on mixing because it's so subjective. And I thought, oh, let me do it. And let me try it. And the reason was very selfish, to be honest with you. I was a really good recording engineer, but I was not a good mixer. But I knew all the best people. And I thought, let me go ask them. And I bet there's a lot of other people that want to know this. And they did. So the first version, of course, it was 1999, and it was pre-internet. So, well, pretty much. And that was more based around being in a pro studio with the console, and there were very few home studios at the time. And it's progressed. And this version, the fifth version, is for desktop mixers. It's somebody trying to mix, somebody mixing from your personal studio. So it covers everything you can think of, all the operations of mixing, as well as we go into a little bit of mastering. There's interviews. It's the other thing. I told you that I went to all these great mixers that I knew, and I asked them how they did it. And I found when I was finished that they were very compelling. And I thought, well, let me include them. And so many people loved reading, even though a lot of them are contrary, because, there'd be someone from Nashville.
Right, not everybody agrees.
Yeah, they just had different approaches. Less so now than back then. For instance, the New York City compression trick. This was something that I coined in that book. The reason why was all the people from New York, all the mixers that I interviewed, all used the same, I don't want to call it a trick because it's the same technique. And the people from London and from Nashville and Los Angeles just did not. So it's like, well, if you guys did it and it sounds really good, I can hear it in all your records, let's call it something. So there's less of that these days because it's so global, and people learn from everybody else around the world.
Yeah.
So there's so much less of that provincial mixing, so to speak.
Provincial mixing. That sounds great. Little glass of wine and some
Yeah,
French bread
right.
off to the side.
The recording engineers, just quickly. So every author will tell you the same thing. After you finish the first book, you go, I'm never going to do that again. And that's exactly what I said. And a couple of years later, the book was a hit because there's no other book on the market. The publisher came to me and said, you should really do another book. Oh, okay. So I just used the same formula for the recording engineer's handbook. And that delves into all the different techniques on just about every instrument you can think of. So not just one technique, there's 3 or 4. So there's lots of variations. If one doesn't work, there are other ones. But these are mostly it starts out with, what is the standard method for an upright bass, for instance? Well, there's this, but there's, you can try these other 3 ways too that have worked very well for a lot of people. So that was a big part of it. I looked into, a session as well, what happens in a tracking session with real musicians, and then what happens today when we use loops, and how we should approach that when recording and overdubs and things like that. So there's a lot of that in there.
Do you cover things like phase relationships between mics and pickup patterns, polar patterns, and things like that?
Yeah, there's a couple of really introductory chapters. One on microphones, everything you want to know about microphones, for instance, the different types, the different polar patterns, all that stuff is covered, as well as some ancillary gear, mic preamps, compressors, EQs, things that you might use in the tracking chain. So that's all important because people still do that. I mean, outboard gear isn't purchased as much anymore, but if you're tracking, you usually have a good chain.
If you're recording the instruments to make your records, that's one of the cool things about that is that there are all these fundamental things. A lot of things have changed in recording, but air hasn't changed, Yeah. And that's still always going to be the same, the same air. Oh, okay. We can get into the minutia of that. Maybe air is changing slightly, but, the fundamental physics of sound we're still dealing with the same physics of sound. And that goes into something like the recording engineer's handbook and understanding sonics going into microphones and everything.
Yeah, both those books also talk about acoustics of your recording or listening space, because you can't mix it if you can't hear it.
Yeah.
I provide some easy, inexpensive ways to upgrade your room. Like I say, inexpensive, meaning if you spend $150 and you can swing a hammer, you can really make a big difference. So there's a lot of that. There's a whole chapter on that, and a whole chapter on monitors, how to evaluate monitors, how to choose something that works for you. And that's where reference tracks come in, actually, one of the places.
Do you remember do you have any stories from your own experience of trying to mix when you couldn't hear and then sort of having the aha moment with it?
Well, I'll tell you a big one that happened. I was mixing a movie, and it was a movie called Whatever It Takes. It was an Ashton Kutcher movie. Terrible. I think 10 people saw it. But that being said, I was mixing music for it, and the director and the producer came in. And it was early. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. So I was being respectful of their ears, and, it was kind of at a low level. And finally, I realized that I was missing something. And actually, it was the director that said, "Hey, can you turn it up? I have to feel this." And when I did, I heard the low end, which I didn't hear before. And I discovered one of the things that I was doing is I was mixing too low, too quietly. Now, it's important that you mix at a reasonable level so you don't burn your ears out. But there is a time at the beginning of a mix that you really have to move some air for a minute or two anyway, just to hear what's going on in the low end. And I wasn't doing that. When I learned that trick, my mixes got a lot better.
Yeah.
And then the final piece of that was a trick that I learned from interviewing a lot of these wonderful mixers. And they all had a final, what would you call it? A final listening that they would do. Some would open up the door and walk down the hall and listen that way. One, I don't remember who, would turn on a vacuum cleaner and try to hear it above the vacuum cleaner. But what I discovered a lot of them would do, and what I've subsequently done, is turn the level down really low, like below whisper level. So much so, if somebody comes in to talk to you, they're drowning it out. And what happens at that point is you begin to hear things or not hear things that you expect to. So, for instance, there might be something that jumps out and you go, oh, wait, that's too loud. And you might miss something that you went, oh, I thought that was loud enough, and it isn't. So this, and again, this is only for a minute or two, but it really gives you a chance to balance a mix in such a way that it does translate to other playback systems. So it was this 3-level mixing that I learned kind of the hard way.
Yeah, that has been a big improvement for me, is learning that low-level mixing. I'll do that where, and I've mentioned it on the show many times, but I'll put it in mono and put it on my Avantone mix cube and turn the speakers down as low as it'll go. And I'll just balance the instruments. Can I hear each instrument? I don't even, maybe I'll do some EQ stuff, but a lot of times, no, don't even do EQ stuff. Just, can I hear them? And it really helps a lot, especially with guitars, I felt like, and panned out guitars, because that can be so deceiving. You can have a dark guitar and you can have one that's got a little more highs on one side or whatever, and you pan them and you sort of set them where you think they go, but then when you sum them together, you realize, oh, they're way out of balance or whatever. So that was really insightful. And then what you said earlier, the turning things up loud, and it's not turning things up loud and leaving them there, because that doesn't work. Right? What happens if you have it loud and you just work that way all day?
Well, yeah, your ears burn out really fast, so you can't work as long. That's the big problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not even, I think they physically burn out. You start mishearing things physically, but your brain just starts interpreting sounds differently too. Your brain just gets saturated.
Now, I have to say, I tracked the record with Ed Cherney, who was a wonderful engineer, passed away a few years ago, unfortunately. Usually when I produce something, I've learned that I'm better if I don't track it myself, if I don't engineer it. So I always hire somebody, and I try to hire the best I can. So for this particular record, I hired Cherney, and I couldn't believe how loud he was playing things at. Honest to God, I felt like, that old Maxell ad where your hair is flying back. It was so loud. I thought to myself, I will never get used to this. But I did. So it was really loud.
You don't need to play guitar to sound like a pro. Session guitarist from Native Instruments delivers hundreds of lifelike guitar performances, both electric and acoustic, right inside Contact. Whether you're laying down rockin' electric riffs or warm acoustic beds, you'll get 154 electric guitar patterns and over 250 acoustic guitar grooves for strumming and fingerpicking, all grouped into song-ready presets. Dial in recording quality tone with built-in amps, cabinets, mic modeling, and effects. You can drag and drop MIDI into your tracks effortlessly, then tweak tempo, tuning, and feel to fit your song. And with new session packs on the way, you'll never run out of inspiration. Visit nativeinstruments.com, use the code ROCK10 for 10% off, and bring full guitar performances to your next track. No more, blisters on your fingers. I've heard that too. And I mean, I've sat behind Tom Lord Alge while he was mixing, and I don't remember if I thought it was super loud then, but what he would do is he would do the thing that I do instinctively now. I took so many ideas from him. I really did. One of them was feeling things. Like if you had NS10s, you can reach up and feel the speaker, or you just feel the console, you feel the stuff that you're next to see how the music's translating through the vibrations. And then the other is, when you turn it up for the client, you sort of, maybe you work at a lower level and you turn it up and then you walk away.
Yeah, that's right.
He'd go off to the side and maybe like check email on the laptop while we were listening. And I just thought maybe, I don't know. I just thought maybe that was something he had to do right in that moment. Now, as a mixer, I get it. Like, you turn it up loud, the last thing you want to do is be right in the blast zone too.
Yeah. So you say to the client, "Here, you sit here, right in the middle. You sit in the middle."
Yeah. I'll do that. I try to get him to pull, come right up and sit, but sometimes they just stay back on the couch where the bass is heavy. And, there is something to be said for staying in one place while you're experiencing the record too, so that you're training yourself to have a perspective that that's familiar. It's not confusing you. I remember Brad Jones told me he was working with a client, and he really appreciated that client just stayed in that chair back behind him. Maybe it was his way of saying he was glad the guy wasn't hovering over his shoulder the whole time. But, he said he appreciated it because he thought that it was an artist too. And, that he had a better perspective on an understanding of the record they were working on, because he had the same lens. You still get up and move around like you said, but generally speaking, you want probably a consistent lens that you feel like you can trust and get to really know very well during the process.
I did a record with Weird Al.
Mix. Awesome. Let's hear that. I want to hear about that.
Well, there's not much to talk about. He's very quiet, and he basically came in and sit on the couch in the very end of the studio. And every now and then he'd make a comment, but it was rare. And all he did all day was reply to fan mail. So I thought that was very cool. But he was not what you'd expect. He was very quiet. And, when he spoke up, he had good ideas. That's what you want.
I thought you were going to say you're mixing all day, and whenever he chuckled, you knew that you're doing a great mix because the song was funny.
Yeah, right. Well, that would be the ideal story, wouldn't it?
That'd be pretty good. Yeah, I saw him do a show at Bonnaroo. He almost came into my studio for me to record with him, but he was just right next door doing a radio interview instead. So I did end up with his signature on a poster.
Oh, there you go.
But, I saw him do his show, and it was great. And it was a real treat later, because that was the beginning of my musical journey. I was listening to Dr. Demento, that the show was Westwood One or something like that. Was that the radio station?
Yeah.
Back in the day. And so I heard, Dr. Demento in the late 70s, early 80s. I mean, Weird Al Yankovic. He would always make the funny five. That would be the top 5 songs at the end of the show, which of course kept me up till midnight on a Sunday night when I had to go to school on a Monday. But, with my daughter growing up, when she was probably in middle school or something, we're driving home one day and she puts on a Weird Al video, some newer track about it's like a couple who can't decide what they want for dinner, and they're driving through the drive-through, and it's just a hilarious song. It's so good. So anyway, it was fun to see it carry over to the next generation like that. Humor has a way of doing that too, I think.
Yeah, sure does. Definitely. You mentioned something before about listening in mono.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky enough to know 3 of the 5 Beatle engineers, and know very well Ken Scott, for instance. And every one of them, and everyone from that particular generation, would always tell me that the mono mix was the hardest thing to do. And they would spend all their time in the mono mix, and then when it came to stereo, oftentimes they would leave it to the assistant to do. It wasn't as important because stereo was new back then, but also it was like, well, after you get it in mono, stereo is easy. So again, I think we've lost that in a way where we lost the importance of mono, and yet there's so many instances where mono is important, where we hear mono and don't even realize it. So you have to prepare for it.
Wow. So the engineer was balancing the mono mix, and then the assistant was doing the stereo version.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Is that going to be, do you feel like there's an equivalent to the way people are treating Atmos sometimes in immersive?
Well, there may be something like that. Yeah. Yeah. We won't go there, will we?
So speaking of Ken Scott, Abbey Road to Ziggy Stardust, that is, here, I'll pull that up again really quickly, but that is one of the books that you did, his autobiography. And what would we find in that book? I'm so slow with clicking these buttons to show you guys with the screen share. Unfortunately, I wish it was quicker, but such as it is, there it is. It's great with the Ziggy Stardust lightning bolt there.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's only available in hard copy, and you'd have to talk to the publisher and why that is. But anyway, it was a great experience. It taught me two things. It taught me that people really don't remember things well. But also, because Ken would say that sometimes, I don't really remember, talk to this person. And I talked to so many people from that era that vicariously I felt that I lived it.
Right.
So that was kind of fun. But there's one story in particular that points out things about how we don't really remember well. So we're talking about Ken's time at Trident Studios.
Mm-hmm.
And he was describing Trident to me. And he said, so we had the studio on this level, and then the level above was the machine room. And we never had a machine in the control room. Okay. Took it for what it was. And it turns out that an old roadie of mine from back in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania days, and really early, after my band, he went to work for another band, happened to go to London to record, and recorded at Trident. Not with Ken, but with, Roy Thomas Baker.
Wow.
So they're recording, and my friend is taking pictures. And he has a picture of Ken in the control room. Ken came to visit. There's Ken and Roy in the Trident control room, and there's a tape machine there. So my friend sends me these pictures, and I have photographic evidence of this now. I said, Ken, I thought you said there was never a tape machine in there. He says, there never was. Never was. I said, Ken, I have a photo. He says, it never happened. He says, call up, I can't remember the name, but the head tech. Okay, I get in touch with the head tech. He says, no, never. So finally, I digitize this, and I send it around. And one by one, they said, oh yeah, we had it in the control room for about a week. I remember that now. Up until then, they would have swore on a stack of Bibles there was no such thing that ever happened, and yet I had a picture of it. So it just goes to show you that the memories that we have aren't necessarily true.
Yeah, I find that's true. I mean, like even just hanging out with my buddies who's like recounting a story of our early days or, our band days, and I hear, and I remember it differently, and I've learned to just bite my tongue, just let them tell a good story for now, That's great, man. That's great. Here, I popped this one up too. Here's another one that just caught my eye. The Ultimate Guitar Tone Handbook. That looks fun. I mean, it's one of those instruments I guess it doesn't really matter what instrument we have. If we're really into it, we're always looking for the ultimate sound, whatever it is, guitar, bass, drums, synthesizers. What kind of stuff would we find in this book? And is that one that the Rockstars should be checking out?
It's a little dated now. I can't remember when it was done, but it wasn't recently. It was written with Rich Dizzoli, who's a great guitar player and also a fantastic composer. He has over 18,000 cues that he's done. He's been on, I don't know, something like 2,500 TV shows around the world. So he's really prolific. But, and he's a purist too when it comes down to it. He uses real guitars and amps.
Yeah.
So we didn't cover anything about simulators. We talked about it, but it was just coming around.
Early days for simulators.
It was the early days, and there were some problems that they didn't sound that good. And there was also problems a lot of times with interface with guitars. So you're plugging it in direct, and you needed to be careful how you did that, or else you degraded the sound quite a lot. So we talked a lot about that, which doesn't apply anymore. But the basic thing, if you're going to use an amplifier, for instance, there's a lot about amplifiers in there. Again, somewhat dated because there are fewer and fewer real amplifiers that are being used. One of the things I have to say is I understand that, again, being a purist myself, I can say that when Line 6 came out with their Helix,
yeah,
I wasn't a beta tester. I was one of the people on the listening to that, the blind A/B test. So for instance, they would mic 59 Bassman, let's say, with the beautiful C12 and, a nice recording chain and everything. And then there'd be the Helix. So you go back and forth. You wouldn't know which one was which. And there was like 20 different instances of this. And I found that by the end, I could identify the Helix every time. But the funny part was I preferred the sound of it to the real one.
iZotope is truly amazing for mixing and mastering your music. Check out the new iZotope Velvet plugin, featuring intelligent sibilance learn de-essing that automatically detects harsh frequencies, dynamic tone shaping with lift and tame controls, and transparent declick to clean up mouth noises, pops, and clicks, all in one easy plugin for polished professional vocals. And now Ozone 11 takes your mastering game even further with the new Clarity module for adaptive spectral enhancement, upward compression in the maximizer for increased punch without losing dynamics, and stem focus to process individual elements like vocals or drums with surgical precision. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Velvet, Ozone, or any fantastic plugin at iZotope.com. Now, just for clarity's sake, this is happening in the control room, hearing the guitar come out of the control room speakers, right?
No.
As opposed to, or is this like a basement amp in a room right next to a simulation of a basement amp in the room?
No. This was a blind A/B test. So they recorded everything, and they recorded it with the Helix, and then it was basically online for me to listen to later.
Okay.
So I could listen to it in my control room, and I could listen to it on headphones. It didn't matter. Again, the funny part was I could tell after a while which one was the Helix, but I liked it better almost every time.
But you liked it better, yeah. I remember I got introduced to it, and I had the not the hardware foot pedal version, but just the the plug-in version, and I was really amazed at how good it sounded. And we used it for certain overdub lines. I didn't, at the time, I didn't feel like it was the answer for us, doing a rock record for the main guitars, but for like the melodic lines or something that we wanted to put on top. It was so easy to be able to do that. And those are also typically things, that you step into the control room for that overdub anyway. So it kind of makes a lot of sense. Now, I will say with the guitar simulators, we still have some, sometimes head scratching moments where you're like, well, how do I route this and set this up? Am I going to run into latency issues with something? And what does that do to my playing? And then also just the question of like, how do I get my guitar into the computer? What matters for that? And what's the level supposed to be? Where am I supposed to set the mic pre for this to be the equivalent of plugging a guitar into an amp? Do you have any thoughts about that or anything you've learned about interacting with simulators now and those details?
Well, first of all, you mentioned latency, and one of the things that we found out, that the head of product development, the former head of development for Line 6 was a good friend of mine. And he would tell me that some people would complain about latency, and it was unbelievably low. It was like 3 milliseconds or something. And it was the Steve Vais of the world that could feel it. I couldn't. I never could. I thought it was just perfectly fine. He says, yeah, we're trying to get it lower because there were certain players that could just feel it. And this was like incredibly low. So it just goes to show you that it bothers some people and it doesn't bother others, but it is something that's there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess if you can load up your simulator, some interfaces, for example, will load plugins into the interface. So you get like very, very low latency.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a loop back before it goes all the way to the computer and the DAW, right?
Yeah.
And I suppose if you could load it in there, you get a much, much lower.
But Lidge, this is with the hardware, wasn't with the plugin.
Right. Okay. Fair.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do hardware is usually operate at things like at sample rates like 96K?
In some cases, I think it varies quite a lot. There's one of the things that, obviously there's camps, whether you like a Helix or you like the Fractal, for instance, or what's the other big one that everybody uses?
The Kemper.
There's a Kemper, and there's another one. But anyway, and you're either in one camp or the other, just the way it used to be. What kind of guitar amps do you like? Oh, Fender Boogie, whatever. It's the same thing. But one of the things that kind of convinced me was I started to read about all these big acts that were going on tour that left their amps at home. Metallica was the one that really did it for me. It's like, well, if Metallica could tour with amp sims, they must be good,
Right.
If they work for them under that conditions. But, again, the big reason was they sound the same every night. They don't break down. You don't have to worry about tubes. They're easy to carry. So, yeah.
Was it Metallica? I remember hearing a story. Maybe it was like Joe Walsh or Metallica or somebody who would have these big stacks of amps on the stage that looked like they were the amp they were playing out of, but really the line was going behind the stage, and there was a not a high watt,
a Marshall,
yeah, something like that, sort of in a box, pre-mic'd up, self-enclosed for the sound.
There was a lot of that, especially in the hair metal days. You found a lot of that, where I think looks were really important, so they put up all these empty boxes instead. What
about Van Halen? They used to have stacks of speakers on the stage, right?
I can't say, but I bet that they were real. Now, how many they were using, I don't know. I mean, a lot of that had to do with having spares, lots of spares and things like that. And everybody has a rack of, if you have tube amps, even if you don't have tube amps, you always have a backup. So
that's true. If you go simulation route, you don't forget you're going to need a spare, just like a tube amp would.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so speaking of new things, did you bring back anything exciting from NAMM this year?
I'm not going to say
we didn't get to see each other there. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, me too. I'm not going to say exciting. I'm going to say interesting. And the one thing that was most interesting, there was a company there, and I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but they had a technology that was feeding speakers over the electrical lines. And it's CD quality.
I feel like that's old school tech.
Yes, but you could always do it, but now this is at high quality. So they're doing it at CD quality, and they're about to come out with 96K. And I thought, okay, so now we're starting to get it. So basically all you had was a transmitter on one side, and it was a very, I don't know, kind of just a box with not much on it, or, there's no controls. And there was a receiver that you had on the speaker.
I remember that. I think I saw them last year at NAMM too. That's sort of like their home hi-fi setups is what they were kind of showing in their display.
Well, this was not home. This was for pro, but it was for more sound reinforcement.
Okay, great.
Yeah. which makes perfect sense, especially for small setups.
So the thinking is you've got electric wiring running everywhere you need it to go. And if you can just figure out how to send a digital signal clearly and cleanly across that, then you can get a perfectly great signal on the other end at the speaker. And that will give you, what would be the benefit to that versus doing it wirelessly? It's just, you can get more, it's like hardwiring an Ethernet to your computer internet. You're just going to get a faster, steady signal than trying to do it wirelessly.
I think it's eliminating wires, which, people hate. You have to, they're heavy now. They're also, you have to make sure nobody trips over them. There's all that. So there's liability issues.
Couldn't you use not Bluetooth probably, but Wi-Fi to send signal from the main thing over to the speakers? But that probably gets tricky. A lot of interference and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if you're doing a live venue. There's a lot of stuff that gets in the way and wants to prevent you from the show going on if you're doing a live show, isn't there?
Yeah. I think they're not talking about big shows either. They're talking about, setting up a PA in a ballroom or a conference room of a hotel and things like that.
Yeah.
So it was more aimed at that. I get the feeling.
How about any stuff that's been exciting for you in the world of immersive and what's happening now and, the intersection of theater and audio?
For me, immersive works best in a theatrical realm. I haven't heard many things in many music mixes that have really made sense to me. Many times, in fact, it went the other way where it kind of like destroyed the vibe. There's one example where it was really great, fantastic. I was invited to go down to EMI for a private playback of Revolver, an immersive playback of Immersive Revolver. And Giles Martin, who had done it or produced the immersive mix, was there to explain things. So there was only about 20 of us or so. And it was fantastic. And it was fantastic because they didn't use the immersive all that much that you were aware of. You were just aware that it really sounded good. And when something had to be flying around, it was. Or it had to be spread, it was. But for the most part, it was, just a good sounding mix. Now, understand that Revolver was done on 4 tracks. So they used Peter Jackson's technology, separation technology, to separate things out. For instance, many of the tracks were drums, bass, and 2 guitars. And they were able to not only separate all those out into separate tracks, but on the drums, actually separate the kick and the snare out as well.
Amazing.
I know, incredible. So he would play outtakes like that. Oh, here's the kick sound, whatever. And you go, oh, that's just incredible. But it gave them an element of control. Now you'd think because they had that control, everything would be spread out all over the place. But no, they were so, what would be the word? The gentle with how they did it, and mostly because they had done other albums before, so they had some experience in this. But I felt that was the one that really worked for me, and I haven't heard too many that have. Talking about music, different theatrical for sure.
Yeah, that's wild. Now, when it comes to music, also for you, what's your own personal routine of discovering and enjoying new music? Do you how and when do you sit down and just listen to music for pleasure? Do you like to have like a listening room set up? Is it in the car? Is it part of that kind of moving about the city? Is it headphones?
No, it's definitely, the car or whatever comes over the computer sometimes. But I have to say that I'm, or another part is sometimes I'll do a deconstructed hits for my followers. Right. So usually I'll take whatever is the biggest hit globally at the time. So I get to hear a lot of music, at least, that kind of music, whatever's top. One of the things for enjoyment, though, I'm bored with music. I'm bored with the music that is available. I like things that are more exotic these days. I had a Bollywood phase, for instance, where I really enjoyed that. I was in Australia a few years ago, and there was a concert on the stair steps of the Sydney Concert Hall. It wasn't inside, it was outside. And there was a band from Papua New Guinea there. That was the most fantastic music I've heard in such a long time. There were like 9 people in the band, including Aboriginal drummers. Now, the problem I usually have with that is they're playing kind of like modern music, and they're kind of tacking that on.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't sound like it's natural, like it naturally belongs. In this case, it was an integral part of it, as if they started with these Aboriginal drums and then composed around it. So this was such a hybrid of indigenous music along with, whatever was modern and Western. That was fantastic. So these guys went from doing like Aboriginal drums and having some dancers and stuff like that, people in the band that were doing it. And then all of a sudden they go into 5-part doo-wop harmony. And then all of a sudden they go into something that was rap. And every time they transcended into something new, but something different. And it was so cool because it's like, finally, something different that I could hear, that I can enjoy.
Yeah.
So that was one of the best moments that I've had in music in a long time because it was just so different. And I'm not saying being different for difference sake. This was different. And on top of it, they had these visuals that were going on the big screens that were every bit as good as you'd see in Hollywood. These people are from Papua New Guinea. And there was a reason for the show. A lot of it was protest music because what they're trying to do is this French controlled, and they want to be independent. So There was all of these elements that it was like, this is really special.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I remember studying Papua New Guinea in college, in my anthropology class or whatever it was, Of course, we were like studying the pygmies in the jungle or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Again, it was the intersection of indigenous music with Western music, but done in a new way. Because, again, sometimes it just feels like it's tacked on. It's like, for the sake of, this is different. But
are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift for you to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is, these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Well, like Indian music, like I might hear, I love Middle Eastern music. I love the tonality, the instruments, the percussion, the melodies, the scales, and some of the vocals, just sound so beautiful to me. But a lot of times that gets, mashed up with modern stuff and just kind of sounds a little too close to familiar.
Yeah.
When it's done, But I'm with you. I love music from all around the world. Did you ever get fascinated by the throat singing? Remember that was really kind of a craze in the, it was the late 90s when Hun Her 2 was coming and touring the U.S. and I got to see them in New York, and they're from Siberia, I believe. Was it Siberia? It's the Tuvan throat singing from Tuva.
Yeah,
Excuse
right.
me. And it was just incredible for me to hear that stuff. But that sort of introduced me. That sort of opened my eyes to like all the world music out there. And I would love to, travel and go see music everywhere like that. Maybe I'll still do that in my life, but it's amazing that we can just bring it into us too. But you do really have to, push to discover, you know. I think it's important that we don't get complacent, assuming that the internet will bring a wide variety to us.
Travel a lot, Lidge, and travel around the world. And when I go, I never seek out music intentionally. I wait for it to find me. And I always find that works best because I'm never disappointed.
Right.
So I have a trip coming up in April. I'm going first to Sydney. Yeah, first to Sydney, and then to Vietnam, then to Hong Kong, then to Korea, then to Taiwan, and ending up in Tokyo. And
wow.
I'm hoping that I'm going to hear things I've never heard before.
What do you like to do? Like when you do a trip like that, is it purely vacation time, or have you found ways to mix your world travels with your prolific content creation? And, just sort of, I think about you as somebody who reports on the world of music and brings it back to all of us.
Instead of working 10 hours a day, I work 5 or 6. So that's the difference. But yeah, I wind up working a fair amount. As a matter of fact, several times I would, do a Zoom conference or a Zoom training, and I'd be, for instance, once I was in the middle of the Pacific, in the middle of the Atlantic, actually, 1,000 miles away in any direction from land. And I did a Zoom conference. And
hopefully on a boat.
Yeah, I was on a cruise ship, and nobody knew. I didn't let on that I was there, but nobody knew that there was a difference, except I wasn't in my studio. That it didn't sound as good.
That's fascinating.
So all those things are possible now.
So let me think. 2 questions that I would love to ask you in closing. One is, what is new for you? You've got books. You teach a lot of great courses, and you have built some really great communities to bring people together to participate in a wide variety of music. Whether it's, I know that you haven't written a book on songwriting, but I know you team up with people who cover those topics sometimes. So you help people find opportunity there in learning, also mixing, production, marketing, all those things. What's anything coming up for you that you want to give a shout out to? And I mean, I guess this will come out later, so I don't know if the timing is very granular.
Yeah, like when do you think?
Well, this will be midsummer.
Oh, okay, that's way in advance.
Yeah.
No,
yeah,
okay. I don't know what I'm going to have then.
Or what about something that you will have done?
Yeah. Well, an EQ challenge, which is always fun. One of the things I did was a survey of my followers. I asked them what was the most difficult operation in mixing, and overwhelmingly they came back and they said EQ. So I have a 3-day EQ challenge that I do once a year anyway, and I go over a different EQ technique every day. So then my followers, whoever signs up for this, they can try that and then post it on a dedicated Facebook group. And I'll comment on some of them, but then they'll get comments from some of the other people as well. So that's always kind of fun.
That's cool. How does somebody, when you, I'm always a little bit curious about the mechanics of things. So if you post something, you're essentially taking some music and equalizing it and then resharing it so that it can be listened to and then commented on, or am I misinterpreting?
Well, you're doing a mix, and in the mix, you're using this technique.
Right.
And some of it is for clarity, for instance. You're EQing for clarity, which many people have trouble with. Sometimes there's
Right.
so many parts. How do you fit them all in the mix? Well, there's a different EQ technique for that as well. There's, juggling frequencies, and then there's lots of different techniques for doing this and they work in different cases. So we go over all those, and it's like, okay, you're in the middle of a mix now, hopefully, or not. You can start one and try this technique. Tell us what you did, and give you some feedback on it. 'Cause that's always fun.
How do people actually share a mix in a Facebook group? What is a way to do that? Do you sort of post a link to you have to upload it to a cloud somehow and then share it?
Yeah. I mean, you could upload it. It's usually better if you have a SoundCloud account, for instance,
Right.
and you just post a link to it. I think every musician should have a SoundCloud account, to be honest with you. It's
Really?
so useful. Well, from the standpoint that it's pretty instantaneous. You can put something up there and decide you don't want it there, and it's down in 2 minutes. Not like the 2 weeks you have to wait in Spotify. And also, you can make it private if you want. You can get all sorts of feedback. For instance, you can post it and just send it out to a few people and say, what do you think about this? So it's useful. It's worth it.
And it usually has a good sort of embeddable player that will play easily from social media sharing and all that.
Yeah. It's not too difficult.
Okay, cool. So this is the last question, Bobby. How do you stay so prolific? What is a day like for you? And we really appreciate you taking out time again to join us on the podcast. But to get so many things done, what advice do you have for how we can organize ourselves and our schedules to be on top of many different things and, avoid the overwhelm and live long and be healthy?
I write good lists. So
write good lists.
Yeah. So it's a list of what has to be done today or tomorrow, and what has to be done by, if I'm working on a project, okay, what are the due dates that I set for myself on these? And for the most part, I hit them all, because once you write it down, you sort of make this commitment to yourself that I'm going to do this. I'm not saying it works for everybody, but it works for me when I do that.
There is something to be said for the act of writing. It's a physical act. It's a commitment to yourself.
Yeah, I really think it's worth it, and it does. If I don't do it, I find that I lose things. There's things I go, oh, I wish I would have done that. So that's the majority, I think, of how that works.
Any difference between physically writing something down as a list versus digitally in your calendar or something?
My physical handwriting has never been good, so I don't do that. I do it online. Do it in my computer. Yeah. So there are certain things that I don't do anymore. I don't read hardcover books. Only ebooks.
Yeah.
Surprisingly enough, most people buy the print books, my books, instead of ebooks.
Right. Well, your books are great. You get Rockstars. You want to get a print copy of Bobby's books for sure.
Oh, thank you.
They're just great. And there's something about the studio. The studio is a setting. It's a comfortable space. You want to feel surrounded by things that make you feel great about the studio. So like having your book on the table in front of you, when you sit down to take a break, or God forbid I admit that, we have read a lot of things in the bathroom on bathroom breaks in studios. I mean, I remember that the Pro Tools manual, that's when you used to, we didn't have YouTube. You escaped the control room for a minute, and I would pour over the manual, on a bathroom break or something and be like, wow, I didn't know it could do that. Back when you'd have a print copy.
Yeah, for reference books, a print copy I think works better, because it's kind of easier to find what you need really fast. And you keep it right there and you can get to it real fast. It's a little bit harder if it's on your computer, finding the file, first of all, and then digging through where it's at. And it will take a little bit longer. And sometimes you can just lose track of what's going on too easily.
It was, as somebody with experience with all the formats of cloud storage and places to store things digitally over the years, have you got any pro tips for us on that? Is it smart to try and only use one platform, or is it inevitable that we use many and you just have to come up with your own personal way to just remember where the heck you put that stuff?
I have 3 online backups that I do. I try to back everything up. I say I try. There are certain things that I go, I don't think I need this. Back it up to another drive.
Right.
So yeah, I always have lots of backups. The ones online are important to me, but I've never, luckily, I shouldn't even say this. I'm not going to jinx anything.
Right. Yeah, no need to say anything.
Yeah.
We can all think it simultaneously without saying it out loud.
Yeah.
But do you get into things like the NAS? Is that what it's called? Backup and that sort of stuff?
No. I back up my computer separately. And but again, a NAS is a hardware device. It's a network device.
Yeah.
So I just back them up individually. If I had more than 2 computers I was worrying about, I'd probably do that. But there's only 2, so it's not too bad.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, Bobby, thank you so much for joining us on the show together. I guess the closing question that I always ask is to take the Wayback Studio machine. You go back in time and give some advice to your younger self, and you say, this is the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. Is there anything that comes to mind for you when you think about rewinding the clock and just giving yourself some wise advice?
Practice more. And that's both on your instrument and in the studio. I wish I delved in a little bit more than I did.
Yeah.
Simple answer, but that's what I tell myself.
Well, again, I think sometimes we even have to take your earlier advice, which is put that in the list. I think that's sometimes why we forget to do it, because it just wasn't in the list,
There you go.
Bobby, thank you again for being on the show with us, man. It's always a pleasure. Where can the rock stars go find out more about you? What if they want to reach out? What if they got questions? What if they're curious about, mixing, mastering, any of those things, or just simply finding a community to help with any of those?
Yeah, if you go to bobbyowsinski.com, you can find me, and you can find everything there. There's links to the rest of my online world. So that's the easy way to do it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Rockstars. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to subscribe and like this video. Kick that like button and let us know how much you enjoyed having Bobby on the show. And we'll see you in the next episode. And drop in questions in the comments, too, if you have any specifics about the stuff we talked about. Bobby, thank you very much, man. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Lidge.
All right, man. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: iZotope, Native Instruments, Atom Audio, and SAE Institute. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon codes at iZotope.com and nativeinstruments.com. Use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plug-in purchase. And don't forget, you can start mixing right now with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in the show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. Also, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel because it's a great way for you to help support this show. I'd also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for watching and listening, Rockstars. We'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.